So where was I? Uh, so I haven't posted in a bit because I've been traveling and I've been traveling to the hills and it was nice and it was refreshing and everything. But I also don't like traveling in the hills because I find it very suffocating. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like you keep climbing the hill, but you also have to get down at the end of it, and nobody really thinks about that. And like the roads and everything, like it's not an idea that's appealing to me at all. I'm not someone who gets motion sick, so I know it's not that. It's just the actual hill. While I was there was like this thing happening on my school group. It got me thinking back to school days. I didn't actually like school. I mean, I like the people I met there, but school itself as an educational institution, I wasn't a big fan. And I'm not sure if it's just my school that had this, but in my school, for sure, there was this culture of not focusing on the kids that needed it and instead only focusing on the kids that were brilliant, that the school thought, ow, what is in my eye? That the school thought was gonna do good things for the school. So yeah, I mean, apart from the time I spent out of class, I don't really think I have a single happy memory from school. Like, class was just, now it's just one whole mass of time that I can't differentiate a single class from another class or what they taught me at the time. And I know, remember, like a while back, I read somewhere that the purpose of modern schooling is not to educate, but to get us used to sitting in the same spot for hours at a stretch, because that's what they wanted us to do once we were out of school, to sort of prep us for participating in the workforce post industrial revolution. Because I think before that, you didn't really have to sit in one place and work, you were more agricultural. And like after that, to get people into the habit of sitting on factory floors and like working for hours at a stretch, they needed a system that was going to teach us to do that. And that's how they thought of modern schooling. I'd read this idea a while back, but it's just one of those things that I would say to people to sound smart. I didn't really know where it was coming from, but recently I saw a video that was talking about this scam of public schooling and why it's failing as a system. But the gentleman was talking specifically about schools in the United States of America. But I feel like a lot of that criticism can be applied to public schooling in general. And then I got into the topic, and there's this really nice book about it once I started researching. It's called Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. I think that's how you say his surname. I haven't read the entire book, but I have read summaries and excerpts of it. And there's this one part in it which I liked a lot, where he says that the most erroneous assumption is to the effect that the aim of public education is to fill the young species with knowledge and to awaken their intelligence, and that this is not true at all. The aim, in fact, is not to spread enlightenment. It is to simply reduce as many individuals as possible to the same level and to breed and train a standardized citizenry and to put down dissent and originality, which is basically what I was saying earlier. He's said it in a much smarter way. I think that's true because the focus, at least throughout my schooling life, was mostly on standardized testing and not much else. And that's an issue that a lot of people have with the education system. I think the person who was talking about the education system in USA ends his talk by saying, look at Finland, for example. And I know a lot of countries can't emulate that, and we're nowhere close to doing that. But apparently they only use tests in a diagnostic way and not really to tell you where you stand. I mean, I don't know what the alternative is, but it seemed legit. And like there are a lot of other people that talk about this as well. For example, Noam Chomsky in his book, and I hope I'm pronouncing all the names correctly, Understanding Power, says that given the external power structure of the society in which they function, the institutional role of the schools, for most part, is just to train people for obedience and conformity and to make them controllable and indoctrinated. I think there was also this very interesting fact that I read somewhere which said that the way that the schools are structured, and I'm not talking about the course here, I'm talking about how we sit in classrooms and how our recess, etc., is structured, is based on a prison system taken from Prussia in the 1700s, which they found to be pretty effective in disciplining the prisoners. And like, it's not just people who are talking about education. There are like a lot of authors who talk about general power structures in society that have spoken about the role schools play in perpetuating those power structures. For example, I remember a book that I'd read. It's by Bruce Levine. It's called Resisting Authority or Resisting Illegitimate Authority. I'm not sure which, I can't remember. but he says something to the effect that you're not going to school to learn anything or like learn how to use your brain. The only real thing that you learn is how to respect authority and to respond to authority and how to be completely passive and take what's given to you. And then he talks, like, he gives this long explanation of how you can see that in the way the classroom is structured, where it's one versus many, which in fact also represents a lot of the power structures in our society, because the people at the top are far fewer than the rest of us. It's funny how people and philosophers across the board, even when they're not discussing education or the schooling system, seem to have so many things to say about how the purpose is not education at all, it's indoctrination. I mean, as far as I've read, I'm sure there are arguments on the other side as well, but that's wasn't really my experience in school, so I don't really see why I should be talking about that. But yeah, anyway, so the gentleman that I was watching, so he says that there are basically three facets to our personality as human beings, and these are that all of us are diverse, all of us are curious, and all of us are creative. And these are the exact things that, in my opinion, public schooling goes out of its way to nip in the bud, so to speak. I didn't care much in school because I didn't need that much help or instruction, and I was okay. Not like I was some brilliant, sparkling student. I got by and I was enough, and I was okay on my own. I didn't really need teachers that much. It's been a while that I've been out of school, but it's still very interesting to read about this. But these are all books I've read in the past. Another thing I did was that I recently completed this book called Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood. It's a book about bullying, basically. I don't know why I'm obsessed with kids in schooling recently. That was my obsession for the week, it seems. And it's about what time does to your memory. So the book switches from present day to the childhood of the protagonist, and you see the difference in how she was actually bullied at the time and what she remembers of it, because when she's a grown-up person, I don't know if that's the antagonist, but the bully, also her best friend Cordelia, gets a wildly different treatment depending on where in time you are. So if you're reading it from the kid's perspective, it seems like such a huge crisis in her life, as I'm sure it would have been. But when she's talking about it as an adult, she really can't remember what the fuss was about. And then Atwood is someone that I have only read one other book of hers. Since then, I've started listening to Atwood talk and listening to her interviews, and first of all, she is so articulate, and the way she talks is really something I aspire to. Secondly, I really like the way Atwood interviews. If you go and check out any of her interviews, you'll see what I mean when I say that she doesn't really care too much about how what she's saying is being perceived, which is not something a lot of us can do. She's really just out there saying whatever she actually thinks, and you can see that a lot of the times the interviewers get very taken aback. In this book club discussion, they asked her about how she reconciles the character of Cordelia, which is the bully in Cat's Eye, with the fact that she's a feminist author. I've never in an interview seen her call herself a feminist or when talking about herself or her work. So even in this sense, she disagrees with the statement, and then she goes on to talk about how it's not really an issue, the character of Cordelia. And she says that very often in literature, women are either made to be very good in that they're angels, or they're made to be very bad. It's either the lady or the tramp. And all the grey areas in between on the spectrum are reserved for men. So men are allowed to have less to their character, or they're allowed to be grey, or they're allowed to take decisions that, are a bit sus. But for women, you have to either paint them in one light or the other. And she disagrees with that. And she says that, if they're human beings, they're going to do stuff that you disagree with once in a while. And that's exactly what Cordelia was. So she doesn't even regard Cordelia as an antagonist, which makes sense because somewhere in the book, if you read it, there is a switch in the power dynamic and the bully becomes the bullied. But I'm not going to spoil it for you in case you do want to read it. This answer, actually, I've heard coming out of other very good authors as well. I remember when everybody was crazy about how George R.R. Martin could write female characters so well, and his response was just that I write them the same way I write my male characters, as human beings. The interviewers are always asking about how you could possibly give so much depth to a female character, and George R.R. Martin really dislikes this question because some of his best characters are female. And I remember that they used to ask him this a lot in the context of Cersei Lannister, because she's supposed to be so obviously evil, but then she has a redeeming quality, which is that she likes her kids. Side note, I think he said somewhere that she's based on the character of Margaret of Anjou. That's a French word, and I may have murdered it, but let's go with that. Who is a very interesting character in history. She was, I think, called the She-Wolf, and she had a lot of fascinating stories surrounding her about, the usual sort, how she eats children or she bathes in the blood of virgin. I don't know why that's the first thing to come up about female monarchs. In popular media, I think I have come across a character in The White Queen, which is by Philippa Gregory. Great book, by the way. I get a lot of my historical fact from reading historical fiction, which then gets me excited about what actually happened, and then I go and check it out. Really long side note. It's not even just these authors defending their characters whenever they do manage to write a half-decent female character. It's also the actual treatment of women. Off the top of my head, the example that I can think of is this documentary I saw on Elizabeth Holmes, where she went from being completely the poster child of innovation to the worst sort of person alive, and there was never an in-between. But on the other hand, if you see the treatment of men who may have committed crimes of a similar magnitude or worse, their treatment is always more humane. For example, Dominic Strauss-Kahn, in his entire documentary on Netflix, whenever they talk about the actual crime that he's committed, they're always prefacing it by talking about how, despite this, he was a great economist, or because he's a great economist, his actions are sort of not justified, but like you can see where he's coming from since he's always on such a high power trip. In another interview, someone asked Atwood, do you consider yourself to be a feminist writer? I think point blank in her reply was that any book with women in it has to be feminist writing, because you'll find it's very difficult to write a book without women in it. So yeah, that's it.